So we were dealing with the fourth verse of the fourth chapter. So as I said earlier, in this fourth section, in this fourth chapter, Gaudapada deals with some of his fundamental doctrines that he expounds in this text. One, as I said, the doctrine of non-origination. His theory is the world as we find around us, the world in which we live, the world of manifoldness, the world of plurality, the world that comes and goes, which undergoes changes, is in fact non-existent, because to begin with, it never originates. This theory, this doctrine of non-origination, may sound to be a bit illogical and sometimes even ridiculous from a purely realistic point of view. How can we say the world in which we are living is actually non-existent? The doctrine is this. If you believe that a pot comes into existence as a separate entity from clay, you can very easily find that it is ridiculous, because when the pot sits in front of you as pot, it is not different from clay, which is the material cause out of which the pot is made. And before the pot came into existence, it was clay. And after it is broken, it goes back to clay. So it has no separate existence, no separate ontological status of reality, even when it sits in front of you on the table. Now, what do you find in front of your table is nothing but clay, which assumes a particular form and therefore a particular name, which temporarily, in a relative sense, gives it a separate existence, but that is only a relative understanding of the ontological position of the pot. Or just take a golden ornament. Is the golden ornament really independent of gold? No. Before the necklace was made, it was gold. And when you melt it, it goes back to gold. So when you wear it, then also it is gold. The difference is it has got a form and also a name which make it appear to be different from gold. Similarly, the world in which we live, when looked upon from the absolutistic point of view, is Brahman, Atman, or consciousness itself. So, for a spiritually evolved person who lives in this world, who looks upon this manifold relative phenomena, the world is seen and experienced to be non-different from Brahman. Because that person understands that name and form are relative. They do not enjoy the status of absolute reality from an ontological point of view. I already explained this earlier in Vedanta. This should be always kept in mind. There are 4 levels of understanding reality. When I use the word Vedanta, I mean Advaita Vedanta, the philosophy of non-dualism. At the lowest level, there are things which are absolutely unreal, in the sense that they cannot even be conceived of at the intellectual level. At the highest level, there is the absolute reality, which is the only reality, because it doesn't exist in time. It transcends time, it transcends space, and it transcends causation. It is beyond relativity, it is beyond Maya. And Brahman or Atman or consciousness, as we translate the word into English, is the only absolute reality, because it was never born, because it always existed. And therefore it will never cease to exist, because it will always exist. In the sense that it goes beyond the 6 levels of changes, which in Vedanta it is called Shat Vikara, means 6 changes. The 6 changes are being born, existing, growing, evolving, decaying, and vanishing or dying. Now, everything that is relative in the world is subject to these 6 changes. Brahman or Atman or the Supreme Consciousness is the immanent reality residing in all beings. It is also the omnipresent reality which is all-pervading. It is also the transcendental reality. So it is eternal, everlasting. Everything else is relative. Now, as I said, at the lowest level, there are things which are absolutely unreal. As I said, things which we cannot even talk about, things which do not even exist as ideas. Vedanta gives certain stock examples, illustrations. These illustrations are used not only in Vedantic texts, but even in the earlier Buddhist philosophical texts. For example, you might have heard of this doctrine of emptiness, which is called Shunyavada, which is attributed to the great Buddhist philosopher Nagarjuna, who wrote his famous work, the Madhyamika Shastram or Madhyamika Karika, which is the Bible of the doctrine of emptiness or Shunyavada, which is one branch, one of the 2 prominent schools of Mahayana Buddhism. The other one is Vijnanavada or Yogacara, subjective idealism, which also produced a large number of scholars and thinkers. So all these philosophers also used these stock phrases. For example, the word Vidya, Maya, all these examples. So they use it and they give some illustrations to show what they mean by things which are totally non-existent, which do not even exist as ideas. As I said, the son of a barren woman, Vandhya Putra is the term they use. The son of a barren woman. It is a contradiction in terms. The horns of a hare, Sasavishana, which is again a contradiction. If the animal is hare, it can't have horns. If it has horns, it can't be hare. Like that. So if somebody says, well, I saw a hare which has horns, he's actually talking through his nose, so to speak. Now, between these two extreme points, the absolute eternal reality, Brahman or Atman at the highest level, and the absolute non-existent things at the lowest level, there are 2 levels. There are certain things which may exist as ideas. I gave this illustration several times, but these are the illustrations used by the great ancient Buddhist and also Vedantic philosophers. As I said, the Rajju Sarpa Bhranti, I mean the wrong notion, I mean a kind of misunderstanding. In a dark room, when you see a snake-like object lying on the floor, you may mistake that rope for a snake, or you may mistake that rope for a thin stream of water, or a stick, or maybe a crack on the floor. These are 4 illustrations. So, Sarpaha, Jaladhara, Bhuchidra, and Danta. These are 4 terms I already explained. Snake, a crack on the floor, a thin stream of water, or a stick. All these, the rope could be mistaken for any of these things. Now, when you mistake a rope for a snake, you can't say the snake is totally non-existent, as the horns of a hare. The snake doesn't lie in front of you. It is a rope, not a snake. But unless the snake existed somewhere, maybe in the forest, maybe in the zoo, or you may have seen snakes, maybe in a bush, and you have that memory in mind. So when you see an object which closely resembles the snake, you may mistake the rope for the snake. So the snake is not totally non-existent. It doesn't exist in front of you, but it exists somewhere in the forest, which you have seen sometime in the past. So the snake idea is projected in your mind from memory. So it is not totally non-existent. Then there is something else. The rope itself, the world. See, San Francisco Bay, the Golden Gate Bridge, the valleys, the mountains, the vehicles, all these. Can we say they are totally non-existent? No. But can we say that they are absolutely existent? If you want to use the term that they are absolutely real, Paramarthika Satta or Satya means a truth or an existence which is absolute. We should remain without any change in the past, in the present and future. So if you have to believe that Golden Gate Bridge is the absolute reality, you should admit that after a million years or millions of years, it will be there. But it won't be there. So, but it is not non-existent. So it is called relativity. It exists, but it exists within time. It exists within space. And it has a cause. Somebody built it. So whatever belongs to time, space and causation is relative. This is called Vyavaharika Satta. So these are the 4 levels of 4 concepts related to ontological reality in Vedanta. One is totally non-existent. So it doesn't have any ontological status. Then the snake, it has got the status of an idea or a memory or an impression that we carry in our mind, because you have seen that sometime in the forest. The third one, this world in which we are living, the world of which we are a part, the world that we experience, the world which is very much a part of our daily existence. It is not absolutely unreal, but at the same time, it's obvious, but at the same time, you will admit that it can never be absolutely real. Because there was a time when it did not exist, maybe several billions of years back, the universe that we experience today did not exist. And maybe after some billions of years, it may not exist the way it is existing today. So these are the 4 levels. Now, Vedanta says, what is absolutely real cannot be born. Why? Because birth indicates the transition from a state of non-existence towards a state of existence. So, Brahman or Atman or consciousness is the only reality which is the absolute reality behind everything. It can never be born. Again, another point, what is absolutely unreal also cannot be born. As I said, the horns of a hare can never come into existence. Brahman, or the absolute reality, Atman, cannot take birth. The horns of a hare also cannot take birth. Another example I give, the city that you visualize existing above the clouds. It's all taken from the old imaginaries, small children, little kids, when they look at the sky in the evening during sunsets, when the light is very brilliant, sun is slowly fading away in the west. Children ask, what is they look at the sky, they find multicolored, multi-layered sky above them. If a grandfather tells the child, see, there's a big city over there in the clouds, children may believe. So Vedantins say, those who think that world in which we are living is eternal are like children in philosophy, children in spiritual culture. That's all. They are not children otherwise. So even you may be great scientist, still be children in philosophy and spiritual understanding. That's the idea behind. So that's the idea which comes in the fourth verse. Bhudam na jayate kinchit, abhudam naiva jayate. So, that which already exists, that is bhutam, which is Atman, supreme consciousness. Because there was never a time when it did not exist. It's always existing, and there will never be a time when it will not exist. So that reality, it cannot be born. Bhudam na jayate. And then abhudam naiva jayate. Abhudam means that which doesn't exist. Like the horns of a hare. That also cannot be born. So, here Gaudapada uses one technique in this philosophy. Vivadantu advayahevam ajadim khyapayantite. As I said last time, I already explained there are two fundamental streams in Indian philosophy with regard to creation. One school of philosophers argue that what comes into existence already pre-exists in the cause, normally. They are talking about the world, worldly objects, phenomenal objects, empirical things. These are different schools. In Indian philosophy, there are 6 systems of philosophy which belong to the orthodox school who accept Vedas or Upanishads, they call Shruti, as the supreme authority. I already mentioned this. The most prominent one is Vedanta. The other is the school of ritualism, Mimamsa. Then, as you already know, Sankhya philosophy, who believe they are evolutionists. These Sankhyas, these philosophers, they believe that effect pre-exists in cause, and that cause becomes the effect. They believe in the theory of evolution, which is technically known as Parinamavada. Vedantins believe that the cause never becomes the effect. Whatever transformation you find in this world is only apparent transformation, not real transformation. So this is one school. Then there is another school, main school. That school believes that whatever is born is altogether a new creation. They say, for example, when you make clothes out of threads, that cloth is altogether a new creation. It has no relationship at all with the threads, cotton threads, out of which you make the cloth. The argument is, of course, this is not my argument, this is not the view of Vedantins, it is their argument. The argument or the views held by the ancient Indian atomists. The school of atomism is called Vaisheshika philosophy. It's a very ancient. Vaisheshika Sutras which belong to almost 2500 BC. Kanada is the great exponent. So he said that whatever comes into existence in this world is altogether a new creation. Sankhyas believed that whatever comes into existence already pre-exists in the cause. The cause transforms itself into effect. This is one view. Its opposite view was held by these Indian atomists who believe that entire creation is constituted by configurations of different units of existence, which they called Anu, Paramanu. They have an elaborate system of analysis trying to explain this universe. They say everything is a transfiguration of tiny atoms. Surprisingly, many modern thinkers have tried to see some connecting link between modern atomic physics and this ancient theory. Of course, that is not within our range. I'm not going to that. Those who are interested, you can read, there is a famous verse in the Upanishad, and that is often quoted by these thinkers. Those who are trying to see a link between the ancient atomism and modern atomic physics. In the Upanishad, there is a famous verse. The great teacher Yama gives, Anohu aniyan mahadu mahiyan atmasijantohu nihitam guhayam tamakradu pashyati vita shokaha dhadu prasadat mahimanam atmanaha. This is a verse I shall explain in detail. The idea is this. In the minutest of the minute. So the word uses anu. Anu is a Sanskrit word for atom. The tiniest particle that you can conceive of. So the great Upanishadic seer says, within the tiniest atom and also within the largest, the grandest of grand things, within the tiniest of tiny particles, anohu aniyan means, within the tiniest of the tiny particles, and also in the largest and grandest of phenomenal objects, there is an immanent principle. Atma asya jantohu nihidam guhaya means this Atman, this supreme consciousness, this divine, I don't know whether you could call it God's particle or not, but it's a new Nobel Prize, Whatever it is, this divine spark which gives life to all the created beings, this divine spark resides as the immanent principle within the tiniest of the tiny and also within the grandest, greatest of objects. So that's the idea behind. So that is, of course, that is from a purely metaphysical point of view. Now, these Indian atomists believed that the entire creation, this universe, is a configuration of different formations of these anus or paramanus. Anu means atoms. They give the atoms. Now, of course, they are not Vedantins, remember. They are not Vedantins. They do not share the views of Vedanta. But in many other matters, they are very scientific and very rational. And they say, of course, their theory is everything that comes into existence is altogether a new entity. Their arguments are somewhat funny or ridiculous depending upon how you look at them. They say you use clay for one purpose, but the purpose for which you use a pot made of clay is different. You cannot drink water with clay. You need a cup made of clay. You don't tie a gold biscuits around your neck. You have to convert that gold into necklace. Then only you will wear it on it, or earrings or necklace, whatever it is. So there are differences with regard to utility and also shape, form, name, size, and so on. Therefore, there is practically no relationship at all between clay and a mud cup, a cup made of clay. That is their argument. So they believe everything that is created is a new entity. Here Gaudapada is presenting these two opposite views, and he says each cancels the other. That's the idea behind. He says those who belong to the Sankhya school of evolution say that the effect pre-exists in cause. Therefore, the cause becomes the effect. It evolves into effect. And the other group says that the effect does not pre-exist in cause. The school of atomists, Vaisheshikas, and the school of logicians, Naiyayikas. Now, these people are cancelling each other's views. So we have absolutely no botheration, because let them cancel each other. Because each view, each of them has a wrong view. That's why they are able to cancel each other. That is his argument. So Gaudapada, it's a very interesting technique in this ancient book. Gaudapada here brings forth different arguments of ancient Buddhist philosophers and also non-Buddhist Hindu philosophers, popular Hindu theistic, monotheistic philosophers, to show that each of these schools is wrong with regard to their idea of creation, because they do believe in creation, they do believe in the origination of the universe, they do believe that the world is real, the world is eternal. And to that extent, each of their views is to be cancelled, to be rejected. So what is the real correct view? He says, the absolute reality, the Brahman, never becomes this world. It is something like asking, when did I become this body? Coming down to our normal life example. If somebody asks you the question, when did I become this body? It is as ridiculous as asking the question, when did this rope become the snake? Or where did the snake go away when I opened the door? You have to remember the illustration. There's a rope lying in a semi-dark room. Because there is not enough light, you mistake the rope for a snake, and then you go about, maybe you're frightened, then you open the door, so you bring light, you switch on the light, and then suddenly you realize the fact that it was after all a piece of rope. Now, if somebody asks the question, where did the snake disappear? Or what snake was it? Was it a viper or a cobra? Or was it poisonous? Was it just a water snake? No, these arguments are absolutely ridiculous. Similarly, Gaudapada says so much of analysis and argument with regard to this world, which is just a relative entity, all these arguments are absolutely ridiculous. Because the world in which we are living is not an absolute reality. Therefore, we need not worry much about it. We are the supreme consciousness, the Atman behind. As I said last time, somebody raised this question in a seminar, not here, of course. Now, what real human purpose is served by this doctrine? It's in a philosophical conference. Somebody raised this question. What real practical human purpose can be served by learning that the world never originated? Does it solve our problems? So the answer is, the purpose of philosophy is not to solve our problems. Philosophy is not a troubleshooter. When a machinery goes wrong, you may call in a mechanic to fix it. So the purpose of philosophy is not to solve the problems. The purpose of philosophy is to give us the real wisdom and knowledge and spiritual strength which enables us to look upon the problem from a different angle, so that it will no more be seen as a problem. So problem is not solved by this philosophy, but philosophical understanding gives us an idea of what we really are, what the nature of the world is. And once you understand what we really are and what the nature of the world is, we will be able to look upon the problems, we will be able to evolve a new approach towards our life and the problems. Then whatever happens in this world, the so-called problems will cease to be problems. That is the real purpose of philosophy. Here I am not, by philosophy I do not mean philosophy as it is understood in modern Western philosophical parlance. That is a very important point to remember. Philosophy in ancient India, in Vedantic tradition, is a quest for truth. A quest that enables us to understand our true nature, that teaches us to understand the true meaning and significance of existence and life. Fundamentally, it enables us to realize as to what we really are. Are we these physical bodies? If we think we are the physical bodies, the minutest bodily problem, health problem, will be a terrible crisis. If we think we are just it's the psychophysical mechanism, then the minutest physical or psychological problem will present itself as an insurmountable dilemma. On the other hand, if we realize that we are something beyond these senses, the body, and also this mind, the psychophysical mechanism, we are something which goes beyond all this, with something that transcends all this. We are the universal, omnipresent, immanent principle, and its true nature is eternal bliss. That realization enables us to develop a new approach towards problems of life. In fact, that is the real purpose of Vedanta. So Vedanta, it's perhaps wrong to call Vedanta just a philosophy, as the term is understood and interpreted in Western academic tradition. Philosophy in Vedanta is in fact a real quest, a spiritual quest in search of truth about our true nature, truth about the meaning of life, and also the truth about the world as such whole. This is the real purpose of philosophy. So Gaudapada says, our true nature is Atman, that is eternal, that is beyond time, space and causation, which is not subject to changes. Everything else is subject to change. So those who believe that this world is created also believe the world is absolutely real. And those who believe that this world is real will have to admit that what the senses bring to our mind is the only reality. And so long as we belong to the sensory level, there will be no end to the problems. On the other hand, the moment we lift ourselves, we elevate ourselves beyond the sensory level, when we try to get freedom from the tyranny of the senses, it leads to spiritual freedom. But freedom for the senses leads to spiritual slavery. That is what Gaudapada says. So this understanding that we are something beyond the psychophysical mechanism, the eternal, unchangeable, omnipresent, immanent reality, the Atman, that enables us to enjoy a kind of eternal bliss. And Gaudapada uses a very interesting term in this book. He used that in the 3rd chapter also. It is called Asparsha Yoga. He uses this term, as I already discussed earlier, in the 2nd verse. Asparsha yogo vainama sarva sattva sukho hitaka avivado aviruddhascha deshidastam namamyaham. Here Gaudapada is bowing down to the long succession of great teachers of Vedanta who taught us this Asparsha Yoga. What is Asparsha Yoga? It means being established in the true realization that we are the Supreme Atman, which is eternal, which is the immanent residing reality in all beings, which is the omnipresent reality, which is beyond the senses. And once we get established in this strong conviction, then we lose all touch with the wavering, the faltering, the ever-changing flow of problems, sufferings, momentary enjoyments, and again momentary setbacks and distress. All these can be avoided the moment we realize that we are the Supreme Atman. So this is called Asparsha Yoga. Technically it means a yoga which is devoid of touch with anything. That is the technique, that is a literal translation. The real implication is this: to be established in a state in which we are convinced that we are the Atman. We are not these physical bodies. We do have a body and mind and intellect, and we may have to look after the welfare of our body, our mind and intellect. True. But we should always keep in mind that these things, body, mind, intellect, senses, all these come and go, they undergo changes. Beyond and above and behind all this, we are the Supreme Atman, the eternal reality. In fact, the great teacher of Swami Vivekananda, Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, used in a very, very simple, he used a very simple illustration to drive home the practical implication of this philosophy. So when we quote Gaudapada and Vedanta and different schools of thought, we may think it is something mighty big and pedantic and academic doctrine. But Sri Ramakrishna had a very simple way of driving home its practical implication in our real life. So he says, you keep this conviction. What conviction? That I am not this body or mind or intellect. I am something beyond and above all this. This knowledge you keep somewhere in your pocket, and then work in this world. So life in this world may bring many problems. Your friends may deceive you. You may lose money. The banks may collapse. Share market may collapse. Lose the job. There are uncertainties and griefs, and there are disappointments, health problems, all this. So in the midst of all this, you keep somewhere in your pocket See, Ramakrishna did not use the word pocket, but that's the only way I can translate in a Western context. So he said, you keep somewhere in a corner, in a pocket, this knowledge, this supreme truth, and then live in this world. So whenever the world shocks you, disappoints you, whenever it brings depression, whenever it brings a terrible, insurmountable dilemma, then you take it out from your pocket. Oh, I'm not just a psychophysical mechanism, I am the Supreme Atman. You must remember, we must just remember the fact, we do have a body in mind and intellect, we do live in this world, we do need all these things, but we have a higher dimension, a spiritual dimension, a trans-physical, a trans-psychological, a trans-intellectual dimension. This conviction, if we can keep in our mind and then live in this world, then we can live in this world without being a part of this world. So one can live in this world without becoming a worldly creature. That's what Sri Ramakrishna said. It's a very simple philosophy. So some of these teachings are practical interpretations in real life situations, interpretations of the great Vedantic truths which Gaudapada and other great sages of ancient times interpreted in these books. Now we are going to the next verse, the fifth one. That is a very simple verse. We will go to the 9th verse. Before that, we will just go through some of the other verses. Ajada seva dharmasya jadi michandi vadinaha ajado hyamrudo dharmo martidam khatameshiti. This he says, these different philosophers, they think of Atman in terms of birth, death, life and so on. How can the eternal Atman be born? And how can something which is really unborn and immortal become mortal? These ideas have been repeated earlier. We have to remember, just for those of you who have got the book, I have to remember, in the 4th chapter, whatever is stated in the 6th and 8th verses have been stated in the 3rd chapter. There is a repetition of verses. Some of the verses that you find in the 4th chapter are taken from the 3rd chapter. So I won't go into those details. The 20th and 22nd verses of the 3rd chapter are repeated in this chapter. 6th and 8th verses are repetitions of 20th and 22nd verses of the 3rd chapter. So I won't go into those details. Now we'll come to a famous verse because it deals with a very important topic in human philosophical tradition, in the history of human thought. A very interesting subject is discussed here. Those who have got the book can look at the 9th verse. Samsiddhiki swabhaviki sahaja akrda chaya prakriti sedi vikneya subhavam na jahatiya. Prakriti is a term that is used. What is Prakriti? Prakriti prakashena kriyate iti Prakriti. This is the normal interpretation. Nature. Something which is its nature. For example, the nature of fire is heat and light. The nature of water is, say, coldness or coolness. There are certain inherent characteristics that you find in the phenomenal world, in the empirical world, among human beings and also in the animal world, which are innate, inborn, inherent characteristics. They never change. This phenomenon is called Prakriti or nature in Vedanta. So, in this particular context. So, Gaudapada here says the inherent nature of anything remains the same. You can't change it. Once you read the verse, you will understand what Gaudapada means. It is a very simple but very profound idea that is expounded in this verse. So the idea is, whatever is inherent nature, which is intrinsic, which is inborn, which is not produced by anything, it doesn't give up its character or its nature. Now, whatever is produced will certainly undergo change. It will lose its character. For example, I'm just giving examples which we all can understand. See, a mud cup. If you break it, or a cup made of clay or mud, it has got a shape, the shape and form of a cup, and you give it a name. You break it, that shape or form will vanish. So it is not inherent nature of the mud cup or a golden ornament. You melt it, it loses its shape and form. So the shape and form is not intrinsic, it is produced. So what is produced will change. What is non-produced, what is inherent or intrinsic, will remain the same throughout. It will not give up its character. This is the idea behind. So Gaudapada here gives 4 different types of inherent nature in the creation. So the first one that he gives, samsiddhiki, Sanskrit term. The meaning is this: certain characteristics or skills that you develop. Here, what Gaudapada is referring to is this. In ancient times, yogis, you should remember not exactly what we understand by the word yoga today, because today what we normally understand by the word yoga is a kind of physical exercises. It can give us certain skills, certain special faculties at the physical level, that's all. But what yoga really means is self-control, concentration, meditation, a thorough scientific training and analysis of our mind and its workings and its faculties. This is called yogic practice, which has very little to do with what we understand by the word yoga today, the physical exercise of the Hatha Yoga. Now, those who practiced these ancient yogic training used to acquire some special skills in ancient times. Some of these sciences are lost once for all. Some of them are still being practiced by just a few great yogis in some remote corners of India. So they acquire certain skills so they can become small, big, heavy, light, and they also will have some special mental skills. Whatever they want, they can acquire, they can assume, they can achieve. So it is called Anima, Lekhima, Garima, Mahima, Prapti, Prakamyam, Isittum, Vasittum. These are some of the skills which we may call Ashtasiddhaya. Means 8 types of special skills which the practitioners of Raja Yoga achieved through long practices. So these are certain skills, certain natural skills which people achieve. They remain, they will not be destroyed. They cannot be destroyed. That is one type of nature which Gaudapada explains here. You have to remember Gaudapada lived in the 6th century AD. So you have to remember he was living in an age and time when perhaps these great yogic practitioners lived in ancient India. That's what we have to assume from these differences. He is referring to these great yogic practitioners who had these skills. Those of you who are somewhat modern can read the works of Blavatsky, Alcott, and others, the teachers of the Theosophical movement. Those who they lived in 19th century, of course. They were the great leaders of the Theosophical movement, Theosophical society. They also refer to some of these practices which were prevalent in ancient India. So that's Gaudapada says these are certain skills which people achieve through long practice of yoga. They remain. They will not be destroyed. They will not undergo any change. The second nature which Gaudapada refers to is Swabhaviki. Here what is referring to, see for example the characteristic of fire, heat, light, etc. You can never think of fire without heat or light. So wherever there is light or heat, you always associate these phenomena with fire. Means certain intrinsic characteristics of certain natural phenomena. The third one which is referring to is sahaja, means, for example, the skills, the natural faculty of birds to fly in the sky. It's natural. It is natural to birds to fly in the sky. That faculty is inborn. You cannot destroy that faculty in a bird. The fourth one that he gives is certain characteristics which do not come from outside. For example, the natural characteristic of water to flow. That water doesn't have to acquire this faculty from another source. This faculty, this nature is within itself. It doesn't come from outside. So it is called another fact. So these are the four natural, intrinsic, non-produced, built-in characteristics which Gaudapada is referring to. He says these characteristics can never be destroyed. Similarly, what is the characteristic of Atman? Self, the consciousness. It is immanent, it is omnipresent, it is the transcendental reality, it is eternal. It can never be destroyed. Everything else can undergo change, but Atman alone remains changeless, eternal, because immortality or eternal nature is the essential characteristic of Atman. Now, anything which is beyond changes, which is eternal, cannot be born. Because birth, as I said earlier, signifies a transition or a change from a state of non-existence to a change to a state of existence. This is what we call birth. See, where child is born. The child did not exist before it was born. Now it exists. So Atman doesn't come into existence. Why? Because nothing in the world loses its essential characteristic. Water never loses its essential characteristic of flowing. Or the bird, its intrinsic characteristic, inborn characteristic is to fly. the characteristic, the nature of fire is light or heat. Similarly, the nature of Atman is immortality, changeless reality. So, it can never be born. That's the idea behind. So, we'll continue this discussion in the next class. Already time is up. If there's anything that you would like to ask, maybe one question, we have time to discuss. Otherwise, we'll conclude. Oh, yes, come on.
How do you bring the mind to the realization?
Bring the mind, yes. Now, Vedanta says the mind has accumulated a number of tendencies, impressions, and characteristics from previous life, from activities in previous life, and also activities in this life. All these tendencies are not necessarily conducive or helpful in spiritual life. That's why sometimes mind revolts when we take to spiritual practice, or when we even try to read spiritual ideas, books. So the mind should be brought to a state in which it becomes a helpful guide in our spiritual life. For that, we must practice reading these books, listening to these ideas, any idea, anything is sublime, not necessarily this book. Anything which teaches us that we are not the psychophysical mechanism. We are something beyond all this. That sublimates our mind, that elevates our thinking. That will slowly train the mind to take an interest in these spiritual ideas. It's a slow process. So once we can develop an interest in these spiritual ideas, it means mind is slowly coming closer and closer to these spiritual ideas. So first, at the beginning, we will have to make conscious effort to get acquainted with these ideas. It could be by listening spiritual ideas. It could be reading. It could be through discussion, whatever may be. Somehow the mind should be brought to a higher level. Should be brought to a higher level than the world of senses. Normally our mind is always being dragged towards external objects. The five senses of perception are dragging the mind towards external objects. I mean, eyes, ears, sense of touch, sense of smell, sense of taste. All these five senses of perception are simultaneously dragging the mind towards external objects. So mind gets attached to them. So first, these senses should be diverted towards some creative, spiritually helpful, spiritually healthy channels. So when we read some books which feed our mind with spiritually healthy thoughts. When we try to see objects, train our eyes towards spiritually helpful, healthy channels. So also all the five senses of perception should be given a spiritual orientation, a spiritual diversion. This is the first step that is recommended in the teachings of great teachers. First, we must train our senses towards creative, spiritually healthy channels. Reading, listening, thinking, whatever may be. That's the idea. Yes.
Swamiji, is Parinamavada and Sadkaryavada the same thing?
Oh yes, just I explained earlier, but once more I shall repeat. First you have to keep in mind, there are two fundamental, the mutually opposite views with regard to creation. One is Parinamavada and the other is Vivartavada. Both belong to Sadkaryavada. So Sadkaryavada is a mainstream, one of the two mainstreams. Under Sadkaryavada, there are two schools, Parinamavada and Vivartavada. Parinama means the doctrine of evolution. Sadkaryavada, I shall explain. Sadkaryavada means the doctrine that the effect pre-exists in cause. The effect is the created thing is not altogether a new entity. It pre-existed in cause. This is called Sadkaryavada. Under this, there are two main schools: the school of evolution, Parinamavada, and the school of apparent transformation. It is called Vivartavada. Those who believe in the theory of evolution says, just as milk becomes curd, Brahman or Atman, the supreme consciousness, becomes this universe and human beings. This is Ramanuja philosophy, Patanjala, Sankhya, Patanjala. These three schools are upholders of Parinamavada, theory of evolution. The other one is Vivartavada, Advaitins. They say this transformation is only apparent, not real. Then you mentioned its opposite is Asadkaryavada. Asadkaryavada is the doctrine that says that the effect, the created thing, does not pre-exist in cause. Every new creation is a new entity. That's the. Those who belong to this school of thought are the ancient Indian school of atomists, Kannada school. The other is the school of logicians, Gaudapada school. So we'll discuss later when you ask the question in another classes. We'll continue this discussion further. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Darshan.